Welcome to the channel. Do you believe that a parrot could become the only witness to a horrifying crime? A small creature with extraordinary intelligence, desperately trying to warn humans about a deadly secret being hidden. A perfect family. A seemingly ideal nanny. But behind those fake smiles lies a terrifying conspiracy. A parrot that seems to only mimic words. But in reality, it is desperately trying to communicate a chilling truth. A dreadful secret. If not uncovered in time, it could lead to an unthinkable tragedy. Will the baby's parents realize the signals from this unusual witness? Or will they fall into the trap of the villain? Get ready for a story full of suspense and tension, where every detail could change the fate of an innocent child. Don't forget to follow, so you won't miss more thrilling and captivating content. The sun filtered through the grand windows of the Bennett family's elegant home, casting golden light across the living room. Perched on his favorite spot near the bookshelf, Rico, the family's brilliant African grey parrot, observed everything with sharp, watchful eyes. He had always been an unusually perceptive bird, more than just a talker. He understood patterns, emotions, and the subtle shifts in behavior that most humans overlooked. And lately, something was terribly wrong. From the moment Olivia stepped into the house, Rico felt an unease deep in his feathers. To Mark and Sarah, she was the perfect nanny, gentle, caring, and trustworthy. But the moment they left, everything changed. The lullabies disappeared, replaced by cold whispers. The gentle hands turned rough. Noah cried, but his tears were met with chilling indifference. Rico saw it all. The cameras caught nothing. Olivia was too careful, but Noah was afraid. She gripped his tiny arms too tightly. She ignored his desperate cries. Rico knew something was very wrong. Late at night, the house was silent. Rico stayed awake. Across the room, Olivia whispered into her phone, "It's almost done. I just need a little more time. Once I have access to their accounts, it'll be easy." Rico's feathers bristled. Her voice was cold, calculating. "I know what to do with the baby. No one will suspect a thing." Noah. Rico froze. She was talking about Noah. Olivia wasn't just a cruel nanny. She had a plan. He couldn't stay silent. He had to warn them. "Bad lady!" Rico squawked suddenly, his voice cutting through the stillness of the house. "Baby crying. Help needed." The words echoed through the darkened room. Olivia stiffened, her fingers tightening around her phone as she whipped her head toward the cage. For a brief moment, something flickered across her face. Shock, then anger, but she quickly masked it with a smirk. "Oh, Rico," she cooed, sauntering over to the cage. "You silly little thing. Just repeating nonsense again, huh?" She tapped a fingernail against the metal bars, her eyes narrowing slightly. Rico flinched but held his ground. He knew what he heard. He knew the danger was real. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Mark and Sarah had heard the commotion. They entered the room, rubbing their sleepy eyes. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, yawning. "Nothing," Olivia replied smoothly, flashing them an easy smile. "Rico just had a little outburst. You know how parrots are, always mimicking whatever they hear on TV." Mark chuckled, shaking his head. "That bird's been watching too many crime shows." Sarah smiled sleepily at Rico. "Silly boy, go back to sleep." Rico flapped his wings frantically, trying again. "Bad lady, baby crying." But Sarah only laughed softly. "See? He's just babbling." "Good night, Olivia." Mark and Sarah disappeared back into their bedroom, their trust in Olivia unshaken. Olivia turned back to Rico, her smile gone. Her eyes darkened, her lips curling into something far more menacing. "You talk too much, bird," she whispered. Then, with one last glance at the hallway, she slowly reached up and threw a cloth over Rico's cage, plunging him into darkness. The parrot squirmed under the fabric, panic clawing at him. They hadn't understood, they hadn't listened, but he wouldn't give up. Somehow, some way, he had to make them see the truth. Before it was too late, the house was cloaked in silence, the moonlight casting eerie shadows across the kitchen tiles. Perched in his usual spot, Rico stayed awake, his sharp eyes locked onto the figure moving stealthily in the dim glow of the nightlight. Olivia. She stood by the counter, hands working quickly, her movements precise, deliberate, and dangerous. Rico tilted his head as he watched her unscrew the cap of a small dark bottle. A few drops of a mysterious liquid fell into baby Noah's formula, mixing invisibly into the creamy milk. Whatever it was, Rico knew it wasn't right. His heart pounded in his tiny chest. His instincts screamed at him. Danger! Something terrible was about to happen. But how could he stop it? The next morning, sunlight flooded the kitchen, making it feel like an entirely different place. Warm, safe, familiar. But Rico knew better. The danger hadn't passed. It was only just beginning. Olivia moved with rehearsed ease, carrying the prepared formula bottle to Noah's high chair. She cooed at him sweetly, her voice dripping with fake affection as she held the bottle to his lips. "Come on, little one," she murmured. "Time for your medicine." Noah squirmed in his seat, his tiny hands pushing weakly against the bottle, as if some deep instinct within him sensed the wrongness of it. But Olivia was persistent, forcing the nipple to his lips. And that was when Rico snapped. "No, bad, poison!" he screeched at the top of his lungs, his wings flapping wildly against the bars of his cage. "Bad lady! Noah! No!" The sharp, urgent cries shattered the morning calm. Olivia gasped, her hand jerking in shock. The bottle slipped from her grip. Time seemed to slow as it fell, spinning through the air, before finally smashing against the tile floor. A sickly sweet smell filled the room as the liquid spread in a sinister puddle across the floor. For the first time, true fear flickered in Olivia's eyes. She turned, rage twisting her face as she stormed toward Rico's cage, her fingers curling into tight fists. "You stupid bird!" she hissed under her breath. "You've been watching me, haven't you?" Rico puffed up his feathers, but his beady eyes remained locked on hers. He had exposed her. And he wasn't done yet. The tension in the house was suffocating. Olivia's hands were still shaking. Her heart pounded as she stared at the shattered remains of the baby bottle on the floor, the sickly sweet smell of the spiked formula still lingering in the air. She needed to act fast. Rico had ruined everything. Just as she bent down to wipe away the evidence, a sudden, unexpected sound made her freeze. The front door swung open. "Hello? Anyone home?" It was Alice. Mark's younger sister had a habit of dropping by unannounced, much to Olivia's constant irritation. And today, of all days, was the worst possible time. Forcing a smile, Olivia quickly shoved the broken glass under the cabinet with her foot and straightened up. By the time Alice walked into the kitchen, Olivia had already wiped away most of the mess. "Oh, Olivia, I wasn't expecting to see you here so early," Alice said cheerfully, holding a basket of freshly baked muffins. Her 6-year-old daughter, Bella, trailed behind her, clutching a stuffed bunny. "Just the usual morning routine," Olivia replied smoothly, her voice honey-sweet. She lifted Noah from his high chair, bouncing him gently in her arms. "He's just a little fussy today." But Rico knew the truth. The parrot had never been more desperate. He flapped wildly in his cage, his beady eyes darting between Olivia and Alice. He had tried warning Mark and Sarah, but they didn't listen. Maybe, just maybe, Bella would. "Bad lady, hurts baby." Alice and Bella both paused. "Oh my," Alice chuckled, glancing at the parrot. "Rico's quite talkative today, huh?" But Bella didn't laugh. She had always loved Rico, always listened closely whenever he talked. And today, something in his voice sounded different, urgent. "Bad lady hurts baby!" Rico screeched again, his wings flapping wildly. Bella frowned, her curious eyes darting toward Olivia. Olivia stiffened. "Silly bird," she said, her grip on Noah tightening ever so slightly. "He picks up random phrases all the time." But Bella wasn't convinced. Her gaze drifted across the room, and something caught her eye. A small notebook, half hidden under the kitchen table. It must have fallen out of Olivia's pocket when she bent down to clean the spilled milk. Slowly, Bella walked over and picked it up. "What's this?" she asked innocently, flipping open the cover. Olivia spun around so fast that Noah whimpered, her face drained of colour. "That's private!" she snapped, lunging forward. The sudden movement, the harshness in Olivia's tone. It was the first time Alice had ever seen her lose control, and it set off alarm bells. Alice instinctively pulled Noah out of Olivia's arms. Noah whimpered, then clung tightly to Alice's shoulder. Olivia's hands twitched as if she was about to grab him back, but then she froze, realizing she had just made a mistake. Alice had felt it, the faintest pressure marks on Noah's tiny arms, like someone had been grabbing him too tightly. Her heart pounded. "Bella, sweetheart," Alice said carefully, never taking her eyes off Olivia. "Why don't you show me that notebook?" Bella hesitated, flipping through the pages, then gasped. "Mummy, look," she said, pointing. Alice took the notebook, her hands trembling as she read. It was filled with calculations, notes about Mark and Sarah's schedule, bank account details, and most disturbingly, dosages. Alice felt her stomach drop. She looked up, and finally, she saw it. The careful mask Olivia had worn all this time was gone. In its place was something cold, calculating, something terrifying. And just as Alice opened her mouth to speak, Olivia moved. A sharp, urgent knock echoed through the house. Alice had never been so relieved to hear it. "Sarah, Mark, get in here," she called, her voice shaking. The front door swung open, and Sarah rushed inside, her face pale with concern. Mark followed closely behind, his brows furrowed as he took in the tense atmosphere. "Alice, what's going on?" Sarah asked breathlessly, her eyes darting to Olivia, who stood frozen, her fingers clenched into tight fists. Before Alice could answer, Rico's piercing voice shattered the silence. "She hurts baby!" the parrot screeched, flapping wildly in his cage. "Poison in bottle! Look under cabinet!" Sarah and Mark's blood ran cold. "What did he just say?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But Rico wasn't finished. He bobbed his head frantically, his beady eyes gleaming with determination. "Bad lady! Hurts baby! Poison! Under cabinet!" The room fell into stunned silence. Then Sarah moved. She stormed past Olivia, dropping to her knees in front of the kitchen cabinet. Hands trembling, she reached underneath, her fingers brushing against something sharp. She pulled it out, a shard of dark glass, still slick with a strange liquid. Sarah stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. "What the hell is this?" Mark demanded, stepping forward. Alice, still holding Noah protectively, reached for the small notebook Bella had found earlier. She flipped it open, scanning the pages, then turned it so Sarah and Mark could see their schedules, bank account details, dosages, a carefully calculated plan. Sarah's hands clenched around the notebook, her knuckles white. She turned to Olivia, her expression no longer confused or scared, but furious. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is," she said, her voice deadly quiet. But Olivia didn't answer. Her face was pale, but her eyes were calculating. She was already thinking of a way out. Mark took a slow step toward her. "You were poisoning him." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Olivia opened her mouth, maybe to lie, maybe to beg. But before she could say a word, police sirens blared from outside. She whipped her head toward the door, panic flashing across her face. Alice gave a tight, satisfied smile. "I called them before you could do any more damage." For the first time, Olivia looked truly trapped. But even as officers stormed through the door, even as they seized her wrists and pulled her hands behind her back, her expression never changed. She wasn't just a babysitter. She was something far more dangerous. And as they dragged her away, Rico spoke one last time. "Bad lady, hurts baby, not over." No one dared to breathe, because deep down, they knew he was right. The house had turned into a crime scene. Police officers moved methodically, gathering evidence, taking statements. But the horror was far from over. Sarah clutched Noah tightly, her fingers gently stroking his back as he whimpered against her shoulder. Her mind reeled. Olivia had been poisoning her son. But why? Why go to such lengths? Detective Reynolds, a sharp-eyed investigator with years of experience, studied Olivia's confiscated notebook. His expression darkened as he flipped through the pages. "This isn't just about you," he said grimly. "She's part of something bigger." Sarah's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" The detective turned the notebook toward her, pointing at a list of names, addresses, bank account details. "We've seen this before," he murmured. "Families just like yours, wealthy professionals demanding jobs, young children. We suspect they target parents too exhausted to notice what's happening until it's too late." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "You're saying Olivia isn't working alone?" Detective Reynolds gave a slow nod. "She's part of a network. They get close to families, make the babies sick, just enough for the parents to be distracted, emotionally drained. Meanwhile, they slowly siphon money from their accounts. By the time anyone realizes, it's too late." Sarah's knees buckled. Mark caught her just in time. "How many families?" Mark asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. Reynolds hesitated before answering. "Dozens, maybe more." The room felt colder. And then Bella spoke. "I wrote everything down," she said softly, stepping forward. Sarah blinked, barely processing what the little girl had said. "What?" Bella clutched her small diary against her chest. "Rico tried to tell me. I didn't understand at first, but I wrote down everything he said." Detective Reynolds immediately perked up. "You have notes? From when?" Bella nodded earnestly. "Weeks ago, every time we visited, I wrote down what Rico said. I thought it was just funny at first, but then I started noticing things." Carefully, she handed over the diary. Reynolds flipped through the pages. His expression changed. This is incredible," he murmured. "This might be exactly what we need to connect Olivia to the larger operation." Sarah's gaze flickered to Rico, still perched inside his cage. The parrot had known. He had tried to warn them over and over again. And Bella, a child, innocent and observant, had been the only one to listen. She reached out, running her fingers gently along Rico's feathers. "You saved him," she whispered. "You saved Noah, Rico." The parrot bobbed his head once, then spoke clearly, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. "Family protect family." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. But the detective wasn't smiling. He snapped the notebook shut and turned to his team. "We need to move, now. If this is as big as it looks, Olivia wasn't just stealing. She was covering up something much worse." Outside, the flashing red and blue lights of the police cars cast long shadows across the house. This wasn't just about the Bennetts anymore. It was just the beginning. The tension in the hospital room was suffocating. Sarah held Noah close, her heart pounding against her ribs. The past 24 hours had been a whirlwind. Olivia had been exposed. The evidence was overwhelming, and yet, something still felt off. Detective Reynolds stood near the doorway, flipping through his notes. Olivia had been taken into custody, but her cold, calculating smirk as she was led away haunted Sarah's mind. "She's hiding something," she whispered to Mark. "I know it." Mark squeezed her hand reassuringly. "She's caught. It's over." But then, Rico started acting strangely. The parrot, who had been relatively calm since arriving at the hospital, suddenly hopped frantically from one side of his perch to the other, his wings twitching with agitation. "Backup plan!" he squawked, his voice high-pitched and urgent. "Coming soon! Bad lady not alone!" Sarah felt her blood turn cold. Detective Reynolds snapped his head up. What did he just say? Before anyone could react, the hospital lights flickered. Then everything went black. For a moment, there was only silence. A heavy, suffocating darkness. Then chaos. Alarms blared. Flashlights from nurses' stations flickered on. Outside the room, footsteps thundered down the hallway. "Stay here!" Reynolds barked, pulling his weapon as he rushed toward the door. Mark moved instinctively in front of Sarah and Noah, his body tense with protective instinct. And then, in the dim emergency lighting, Sarah saw them, figures moving in the darkness, dressed in scrubs. At first they blended in, But something was off. They weren't running like the hospital staff. They were moving with purpose. "Security footage!" Sarah gasped. She turned toward the monitor in the room, which was still operating on backup power. Her breath hitched. The security cameras, they were catching glimpses of them, the supposed doctors and nurses moving through the hospital, but none of them had ID badges. It was them. Olivia hadn't been working alone. "It's the network," Sarah whispered, gripping Mark's arm. "They're here to clean up loose ends." "We need to move, now!" Reynolds shouted. He had seen the footage too. The hallway outside filled with movement. Hospital security officers grappling with the infiltrators. One of them, a man in a lab coat, lunged toward Noah's room, but before he could get close, Rico let out the loudest, sharpest screech he had ever made. "Stop! Bad lady! Bad man!" The sound shattered through the chaos, startling the intruder just enough for Reynolds to tackle him to the ground. More officers poured in, wrestling the infiltrators down one by one. The attack was over in minutes. The lights flickered back on, revealing the damage, the knocked-over carts, the trembling nurses, the masked intruders now in cuffs. Sarah let out a shaky breath, holding Noah so tightly he squirmed in protest. Reynolds stood up, his chest rising and falling with adrenaline. He glanced at Rico, who still sat puffed up on his perch, eyes glaring at the fallen intruders. "You knew," Reynolds said, his voice laced with admiration. Rico bobbed his head, then said, "Not over." A heavy silence fell, because everyone in that room knew. He was right. The network had been exposed, but Olivia wasn't the only one out there, and somewhere in the shadows, others were still watching. The morning sun spilled over the city, but for the Bennett family, the nightmare was finally over. Olivia had been caught. Her accomplices, those who had infiltrated the hospital, were in custody. And more importantly, the entire criminal network had been exposed. For years, they had operated in the shadows, targeting families, manipulating parents, and harming innocent children for financial gain. But now, their system had crumbled. The evidence recovered, bank records, intercepted communications, Bella's diary, and security footage was undeniable. The media exploded with the story. News anchors called it the babysitter conspiracy. Headlines splashed across every network. Undercover childcare scam exposed. Elite families targeted in chilling plot. Parrot saves baby from deadly scheme. And at the center of it all was Rico. The little parrot who had seen everything, who had tried to warn them, who never gave up. A moment of recognition inside the Bennett home. The atmosphere was different. For the first time in weeks, there was peace. Noah, unaware of how close he had come to danger, giggled happily as he sat in his high chair. His tiny hands smacked against the tray, his bright blue eyes filled with joy. Sarah and Mark watched him with tears in their eyes. He was safe, because of Rico. Detective Reynolds leaned against the kitchen counter, shaking his head in amazement. "I've seen a lot of things in my career," he said, crossing his arms. "But I've never had a case cracked open by a parrot." Sarah smiled through her tears. "He was trying to tell us all along. We just didn't listen." She turned to Rico, who sat proudly on his perch, watching Noah with a protective gleam in his eyes. Slowly, she reached out and ran her fingers gently over his soft feathers. "You saved our son," she whispered. Rico tilted his head, then spoke in a voice clear, strong, and full of meaning. "Family, protect, family." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. Mark chuckled softly, brushing a hand down his face. "Guess we've got a new guardian in the family." Reynolds smirked. A hero, actually. From that day forward, Rico's story became legend. News crews came to interview the Bennetts. They filmed Rico, repeating the very words that had saved Noah's life. His story spread across the country, an unlikely hero with feathers and a sharp mind. Children wanted to meet him. Families began paying more attention to their pets. People started listening. But for Rico, the greatest reward wasn't the fame. It wasn't the cameras, the news stories, or even the recognition. It was watching Noah grow, watching him laugh, play, and be safe. Because that's what family does. And as Rico settled onto his perch, fluffing his feathers, He said one last thing. Good boy, safe now. And he was right. They were safe. The years passed, and with them, the shadows of fear faded. Noah grew up strong and happy, completely unaware of the darkness that once loomed over him. To him, his childhood was filled with laughter, bedtime stories, and warm embraces. The terrifying truth of what nearly happened to him was a burden he would never have to carry. But for his parents, the memories never truly faded. Sarah and Mark never forgot the close call, the betrayal, the terrifying realization that danger had been inside their own home. They never forgot the nights they stayed awake, listening to Noah's steady breathing, assuring themselves that he was safe. And most of all, they never forgot the one who had saved him. Rico, the guardian with wings long after the cameras stopped flashing, after the headlines moved on to the next big story. Rico remained exactly where he belonged, with them. No longer just a pet, no longer just a bird who could mimic words. He was family. He was there when Noah took his first steps. He was there when the boy giggled and ran through the house, tiny feet pattering against the wooden floors. He was there when Noah pressed tiny hands against his cage, whispering secrets only a child could share. And every time Sarah looked over, seeing the way Rico watched over her son, she knew. He understood. The legacy of an unexpected hero. As Noah grew older, he would often ask about Rico. Why does Rico always stay close to me? Because he loves you, Sarah would say, ruffling her son's hair. Because he's your protector, Mark would add. But when Noah got older, old enough to understand, Sarah finally sat him down one day and told him the truth. About the woman who had come into their home, about the danger he had been in, without even knowing it, and about the little hero with feathers who had never let anything happen to him. Noah listened, eyes wide with wonder, and when the story was finished, he didn't speak right away. Instead, he turned to Rico, now older, but still just as sharp, and whispered, "Thank you for saving me." Rico, as always, tilted his head, considered the words carefully, and then, as if to remind them all that he had always known the truth, he spoke clearly. Family, protect family. And in the Bennett household, that would always be true. Not all heroes wear capes. Some have feathers and a voice that can change everything. Rico's story isn't just a gripping tale of courage, loyalty, and the power of family. It's a reminder that sometimes the most urgent warnings come from the ones we least expect. If Rico could save a life, how many other incredible stories are waiting to be heard? At Stories of Paw, we bring you tales of extraordinary heroes, the sharp eyes, tiny paws, and loyal hearts that have changed lives forever. Are you ready to uncover the most unbelievable, heartwarming stories? Hit subscribe now and never miss a story about love, loyalty, and the real-life miracles that animals bring into our lives. And if you believe these small heroes deserve to be heard, share this story, because somewhere out there, another Rico might be trying to speak. Stories of Paw, listening to the silent heroes, so we never miss a miracle.